being an example, the one that J.P. Morgan had to step in and ameliorate at the last minute. The Fed exists for a reason, providing short-term financing during periods of financial panic. I would remind you the 30-day commercial paper market dried up completely last fall. There was a panic. There was a sense, not just in the government, but among the business community, that something had to be done to inject liquidity into the market promptly. The uncertainty the Fed causes is a real cost. On the other hand, my worthy opponents have spent 10 minutes bashing the Fed without giving you any sense that there's an agreement on their side as to what should replace it. And of course, yes, the market, they say, should replace it. But exactly what structure, what mechanisms, how do we get from there to here? And I'll return to that theme. The Fed has taken on far more than a central bank even should take on. It has taken on responsibilities regarding full employment, protecting depositors through an insurance system, many other things. As Richard Rahn points out, the Fed has taken on so many responsibilities it's become like a large fire department that has a fixed percentage of its employees who are arsonists. So as it gets bigger, there are always more fires. Well, I propose there is another course. We have a Fed that is targeted, simplified, streamed down, and focused on its mission, which is preserving the integrity of our monetary value. New Zealand had the same problems in many respects in the 1980s. They had a financial meltdown. They didn't become a banana republic. They became a Kiwi republic because even Kiwis were in short supply in New Zealand. What did they do in response? They created a completely independent, hermetically sealed off central bank. They appointed a board of governors that were tasked with one job only, and that was to keep the rate of inflation within certain targets. And the head of the central bank was rewarded financially if he met those targets, and he was penalized if he failed to meet those targets. A simple mission, a simple set of clear rules, and a simple set of incentives to put those in place. And New Zealand has prospered ever since. Now, I'm not saying this is easy, but neither is slaying the monster without an idea of what you're going to replace it with. Now, Ronald Reagan, who was a follower of the Austrian School of Economics, had some interesting debates when he was in the White House with his private advisors about the Fed. And he always would end these discussions with, well, show me how to get from here to there, and we can talk about it. Until then, I think we should recognize that while the Fed creates uncertainty, having a debate about abolishing the Fed without having a clear idea of what's going to replace it creates further uncertainty. And I would submit to you, at least from the point of view of the business community and from entrepreneurs, during that period of time of turbulence in which we debate the role of the Fed without a clear idea of where we're going, we're not going to have economic growth. We're going to have perhaps more instability. So I submit to my worthy opponents, I share some of your critique, I share perhaps some of your values, but I also understand that we live in a practical world. In conclusion, I always liked the unicorn when I was growing up. Unicorn is a wonderful creature to behold. I'm pro-unicorn, but I've yet to find one. And I don't believe in spending all of my time searching for the unicorn, thinking that I will find it, because so far I haven't. The same thing with a world in which we have abolished the Fed without a clear idea of what to replace it is a search for the unicorn, which we have yet to find on this earth. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You mentioned President Reagan, and one of the most interesting interviews that I had was with President Reagan, and at that time I remember the discussion we had. One of the things that we were talking about was the tremendous power that the Trilateral Commission and the Council for Foreign Relations have in influencing what goes on in government. And even at that time, they had an espoused view of creating a global currency and what they called New World Order. Ironically, after the G20 meeting, the Financial Times heralded that the discussions were so wonderful because, headlines, they created a new world order. So my question is, what do you all think practically is going to happen. Jim Sinclair says that China already wants a super sovereign reserve currency to replace the dollar, and it's supposed to be a critical part of central banks' reserves. Do you all think that that's the direction we're going? And if not, what do you think is going to happen?
I will simply say that the Fed could use some competition. And if it comes from the Chinese communists of all people, that may not be the worst thing in the world. By the way, I think that we are on the verge of having finally a real debate about the Fed, because it has been one of the most secretive and least transparent of organizations. Ron Paul's bill to audit the Fed now has a majority of members of Congress in the House behind it. And as much as I don't want the Chinese running a separate reserve currency, the threat of the Chinese setting up such a thing may actually force members of Congress to ask more probing questions, as Congressman Paul has been wont to do, and question its role. Because if the Fed, through its incompetence and through its bungling, manages to lose the status of the dollar being the major reserve currency in the world, there should be some accountability, and even obtuse members of Congress may demand that.
Yes, go ahead, respond.
If this were 1985 and we were discussing the future of the Soviet Union...
Can you move the mic closer?
Oh, it's not... Oh, sorry. If this were 1985 and we were discussing the future of the Soviet Union, I would hope that John Fund or others might say, you know, Ronald Reagan has suggested that maybe the Soviet Union should come to an end. No, what will happen? Well, nobody would have suggested that it was going to just collapse. It was going to implode. John Fund, if someone were to ask him, well, what are we going to replace those systems with? How are we going to replace, what are we going to do with collectivized agriculture? I believe in unicorns, but after all, what is the market going to do? Well, the nature of the market is a certain amount of entrepreneurial discovery. However, there is an enormous body of literature on the free market in banking. He just mentioned Ron Paul. Ron Paul has written about this, about competitive banking. It's not rocket science. There's a great deal of insight about what the free market in banking will do. So the question about where are we going? Well, the more we try to understand the spirit of Ronald Reagan, who thought the solution is for the Soviet Union to unravel, for the Berlin Wall to come down, the more we will appreciate the idea that maybe the solution is to abolish the Fed and then understand a little bit more about the nature of free market so we can appreciate how a free market in banking will work, about which there is a vast and very well-informed literature.
I can't, as someone who covered Ronald Reagan throughout his presidency, I must remind you that the Soviet Union collapsed to the surprise of everyone almost in this room. It could have happened in an entirely different way with many casualties and much destruction. So while Ronald Reagan wanted the Soviet Union to disappear, he also recognized that it had to be done in such a way that there could be the least possible casualties.
Right.
And I think it's incumbent upon you not just to say the market will provide, but to provide us with a roadmap, a GPS system, by which you will trace how we can get from here to there with the least possible damage. You have not done so. You have not carried the burden of proof, and therefore your position fails. It is not enough to say abolish the Fed. You have to say how, and you have to say with such ability that you will not increase market insecurity, and you will not create economic conditions in the short term that will make it even harder for us to return to economic growth.
Tom?
Well, I think part of wait, is this working?
Gene's mic.
This one still? No. Wow. All right, Gene. Okay. Some kind of racket with the microphones going on here. I'm sure there's a natural explanation.
It's the Fed.
Yeah, right.
Control.
I think the reason we probably didn't get into a blueprint is that, I mean, as it is, I could barely get 5 minutes in, but I've actually got right on my blog right now, tomwoods.com, there's a blog entry called How to Return to Gold. And it links to the most important free market economists who have looked at this subject. So Murray Rothbard's book, The Mystery of Banking, which is out in a very nice second edition in 2008, explains exactly what he would do. Now, his plan involves, in part, requiring the Fed to disgorge its gold holdings and then distribute